on his podcast. That's Lance Slatton of All Home Care Matters. And when you see the lineup of individuals that he's had on this podcast, I was just really excited to invite him to come on here and share some of the insights that he's gained in the conversations that he's had over the years with this thriving podcast. I know I've learned a lot from the folks that I've talked to, and so I'm charged up to kind of turn the mic on Lance and hear some of the insights that he's gleaned from all these conversations that he's had. Lance, really charged up to have you today. And I know you're in Michigan and a proud University of Michigan
Absolutely.
alumni and national champions, huh?
Yes, yes. Thank you for the kind introduction, Steve. And it's just a real great honor to be here with you today.
Yeah, well, before we kind of dive into the podcast and some of the guests that you've had and what you're doing there, give us a little bit of a little bit of your background. How did you kind of slide into this as a career path?
Yeah, so it starts with, our family owns a home care company here in Michigan that services literally the bottom half of the state. But that wasn't my first career objective or goal. I was actually pursuing medical school, and my wife and I, we were happy newlyweds, and we were, planning for the future. She had started her new career, and then all of a sudden, it started with a phone call from a home healthcare nurse saying she'd been taking care of my father, and he no longer was really able to live on his own. It wasn't anything cognitive, it was more physical. And so we gladly had him come live with us and not knowing really what we were getting into, quite truthfully. And that turned into us becoming 24-hour, 7-day a week caregivers, having some of the best healthcare in the state coming to our home 4, sometimes 5 times a week. Never once, though, really being given those resources or that information as a family or as caregivers for our own resources and support. And so, this went on for about 2.5 years until it was no longer possible for him to remain in a non-medical facility like our home. And, I had actually told my wife one day, I said, why don't we find a way to send in support and help to families, not knowing, naively at the time that there's a whole industry out there. I mean, this is like 20 years ago almost now. And so we started looking at that, and we decided to create a company. And so part of that, though, was we wanted to not only, provide the best care for these families as we would if it was our own family, we wanted to give them the support and the resources that we really didn't receive when we were going through this. And so we would do educational events all throughout southeastern Michigan, dementia seminars, caregiver support groups, and then fun activities as well. Well, as we all experienced, COVID started creeping its head, and a lot of these events, the attendance started dwindling. And so I happened to be out at the track by my house one night after my kids had went to bed, and I heard a podcast. And let's just say the quality was not what I would have expected, and I go home, I tell my wife, I said, well, since we're going to hold off on our community events, and this is before our state was shut down, I said, let's do a podcast for a few weeks. Well, as we all know, those couple of weeks turned into a couple of months, turned into a couple of years. And, but we really did some, deep dive research on it, knowing what the field is, what it's about. And because I was never one that really needed or wanted to have my face out there. And, just one thing has led to another. And, here we are talking to you today.
Yeah, no, and what I'm going to do, and I'll drop this into chat as well, but I'm just pulling up the website where folks where you can get more about all home care matters, and it's really easy to navigate, and you can find, I mean, literally hundreds of episodes with a lot of folks that there's like this Tracy is one of my favorite guests that we've had on, just super creative, and so as you can see, over 45 pages of podcasts there. I'll drop that in. But so getting back to the so your home care agency has been in operation for, you said, 20 plus years?
No, no, the companies is we're not at quite 12 years yet.
Okay.
But this all started because I was pursuing medical school at the time, still in college. And, anybody that has pursued a college degree or, a higher degree, master's, bachelor's, PhDs, realize there's a lot of time devoted to that, a lot of commitment. And then you put a parent on top of it that needs 24-hour care. you know, I quickly realized after, maybe 6, 8 months, this just isn't doable. And I was going to put my father's care ahead of my, goals and desires, like I think most people would. And it just changed trajectory entirely. That experience changed my entire life and who I am today.
Man. Well, I think we're fortunate to it, and I'm sure you might have a little regret about not going to med school, but I think that you're probably you're probably serving more people more immediately with the path that you chose.
Honestly, I can honestly sit here and say I don't harbor any regret because if I had, my dad wasn't with us much longer after he went into the facility. I could have picked it back up and continued, but I have found, Steve, my goal for medical school, the whole question we as undergrads was always like, okay, you got the magic answer is why do you want to be a doctor? And these, panels and, admissions boards, they hear all these answers, right? Because I care about people, I want to help. But for me, that really is all I could come up with. And so I found a different way, but I feel like on a much grander scale of how I can help these families. We meet with families all the time who don't hire or retain our services, but we're helping them in other ways by giving them resources, giving them guidance, and things that they're not finding other places. A good friend of ours doesn't own this phrase, but he made me aware of it. It's basically, families a lot of times it's adios after, it's diagnosed and adios, and then they're left trying to figure it out.
Oh man. And you had mentioned that your dad moved to a community.
Facility. So what happened with my father is he had developed osteomyelitis. He had taken a bad fall. And now this is a man who was in the Marine Corps in the 60s, tough as nails. Marine Corps, I tell people, is nothing like it used to be back in those days. A lot of new regulations and oversight. Um, Very proud, very strong, and he thought he could handle this on his own. So he had fallen, developed a very severe abscess, like right in his coccyx tailbone area. That bruise never healed properly, developed into an abscess. I'll leave the rest of the details out, but we ultimately ended up having over 7 surgeries before it was over and done with.
Wow.
And the infection had just spread, developing the osteomyelitis. So the infection got into his bones.
And before I want to dive into some of your podcast episodes, but I'm fascinated by these personal stories because I think these are really where the lessons are. But so you took care of him for as long as you could in your home, and then you reached a point where did you exhaust the resources, or how did that transition happen? And I especially like hearing this from somebody who owns a home care agency, that somebody who is promoting aging in place, but there's a line in the sand that many of us cross where the home might not necessarily be the safest and most appropriate way.
Right. So it's a two-part answer for you, if you don't mind. So
No.
first and foremost, when we meet with families all the time, that's usually one of their top 3 questions. Will you let us know if it's not safe or when it becomes unsafe for our loved one or whoever the person may be to continue living in the home? And we said absolutely, because their care is our number one priority, whether it's us providing it or if you need a more advanced level of care. And so with my father, after the seventh surgery, the infection had spread so far and through his bones that he required to be basically IV antibiotic therapy Q 3 times a day or whatever the case was at that time. That's not something we could provide in the home. And so for his best interest and his safety, yes, we had to ultimately make that decision, even though it was kind of made for us by what his medical needs were. where he did have to be placed into a nursing care facility.
Okay, great. All right, let's amazing personal story and thank you for sharing that. So now it's been, I guess, 3+ years. Are we on 3 or coming on 4 years after the pandemic?
May this year will be 4 years that we launched
Yeah,
it.
I can't believe it.
I
I
can.
mean, it has gone by very quickly, but you've done hundreds of episodes. I'm just out of curiosity. I'd mentioned Tracy was one of the favorite people that I interviewed. What are
She's
some of the
wonderful.
favorites that you interviewed over the time? And I can pull some of these up on the and share the links if because your search engine is really easy to use here.
Thank you. So, like a parent, I can't pick a favorite child, but I can give you three that come off the top of my head, and for various reasons. The first would be a mother whose child had Williams syndrome, and why this was so profoundly impactful to me personally and professionally is we did not know this woman. She lived in an entirely different continent, let alone country, and she reached out to us and wanted to share her story of her child and his childhood for the very first time ever. This is not something that was widely known, outside of her immediate family and her child's doctor. Her name was Vicky McGregor, wonderful lady. Her son's now an adult, but what really stood out for me is one, our show wasn't as old as it is now. I don't know if it was as profoundly known and recognized. And she had said, I've listened to several of your episodes, and I guess we knew some mutual people. And she says, would you be interested in allowing me to share my story? And so we learned about her story. Her son was born with Williams syndrome, and she had said, I have a different type of story though. I made the decision as his parent that when we got this diagnosis, I was not going to let my child know about the diagnosis, nor were we going to tell anyone about his diagnosis.
Huh.
So, two things really stood out to me. One, being a parent of three wonderful children, but also being the child of parents. So, in my head, Steve, I'm going, okay, wow, if one of my children were diagnosed with something like this, would I tell them? But then I'm thinking, as a child, if I had this, would I want my parents to tell me? And I don't know if there even is the right answer for that question or those questions. But it just meant a lot to me that, she felt comfortable and trusted us enough to, share this story that she's been wanting to share, and she chose us to do it. So that one really stood out.
Now, Williams syndrome, I'm not familiar with it. Can can you provide us with a little bit of an overview of this?
So I guess off the top of my head, I'd rather use a definition from the internet, but it is something that, it's more visual. You can see the person who has it. They do have some physical limitations, but I would hesitate to say too much more just in
No,
case
I just pulled it up on NIH and I will drop that link in there.
yeah,
And it looks like characterized by developmental delay, intellectual disability, cognitive profile. So more of a cognitive disability, but the fact that it's a yeah, I love it when just like you shared your story, I, some of the best discussions that I've had are just real people, real life examples, and again, it's a good reminder to the folks that are in the audience. It's sort of like, hey, yeah, if you want to share a story, what I found, and I don't know if Vicky found this is that when people have gone through a caregiving, I don't want to call it challenging. This is what we're supposed to do, but you go through through a caregiving situation,
journey.
they really want to share it to help other people in the same boat.
Absolutely.
Um,
100.
Okay, so that's one of the discussions that I can't wait to listen to that. I haven't listened to that one.
It's quite remarkable, and we've kept into well, I would say 90% of our guests we develop relationships with, stay in touch with. If we can help them in any way, we're happy to do so. The second one is Catherine Calamitis, who is such an inspiration. I cannot say enough positive, wonderful things about her. Just a remarkable, remarkable person. She was born with osteogenesis imperfecta. The audience may more commonly know it as brittle bone disease. So she was born with brittle bone disease. She's at the last level where there's a survival rate. If she had one more step, if you will, of the diagnosis, one, I guess, worse step, life expectancy isn't past, like days or weeks, because the brain, the skull doesn't have time to actually harden to protect the brain. And so she's like a level before that. I forget exact numbers, but I believe by the time she was 5 years old or so, she had already several hundred broken bones. Um, Both of her parents were doctors of veterinary science. So it got to the point instead of, 500, 400 broken bones every few days or weeks, you can't, I mean, I suppose you could, but and plus they had the medical knowledge. She's like, we just stopped going to the doctor. They would treat it at home and take care of it. And what's remarkable to me about her, and I use this even in my own life, Steve, we all have good days and bad days. And, here's this remarkable person who is dealing with this for her life. She keeps such a positive outlook on things. She's written a memoir called, Looking Up, kind of a play on words, both in her stature and size, but also just always looking up at things rather than down at them. And in fact, last Christmas, Santa brought our children a puppy, and Catherine is a renowned artist. Like she has art pieces and exhibits and things in stores and museums, or zoos rather. And so I actually reached out to her and I said, hey, our kids just got a puppy. They love it to death. They've been wanting one for a while. If I send you a portrait, and she does animals exclusively, would you, so we hired her and she painted the most remarkable painting of our puppy. And, that just meant an extra lot to me because I also know her personally.
Mhm.
But her story is it's just awe inspiring. I shared it with the principal even at our children's school, and, he's used tidbits out of it as well, just because, you have kids, oh, it's not fair, this, that, and the other. And it's like, here's a person who could easily say that. In fact, we touch on that in our interview, but yet she is making the very best, if not exceeding expectations by accomplishing and doing all these and being an inspiration to countless others.
Yeah, no, again, just hearing you talk about her, it's just a great reminder to all of us that there's, I think a lot of times the things that we get stressed out about and the things that we, feel like we're being a failure or not, that there are so many people out there that are facing significant challenge. I mean, just describing this and having broken bones to the point where your parents who are healthcare professionals just basically say, hey, we're just gonna do the best that we can on our own here. This is well, another amazing one that again, I'm really glad we're doing this because I have gone through and listened to a few of your podcasts, but I would have not chosen these two, and you've sort of spotlighted them
Yeah.
for us, which is, I
Yeah.
think, is great.
Yeah, they're incredible stories, and but for different reasons. And I would just say, like with Catherine, one of the other remarkable things is, she's not mobile, so she doesn't walk. And if you go to her website or watch our interview, there's video of her. I said she's a renowned painter, right? I can barely draw stick figures, okay? So I have a great respect for others who can do things that I don't have talents for. But, she is literally picks up and carried and laid down on a table and has to paint that way.
Mm.
And she makes the most wonderful, beautiful art. So I just look at that as so it's very inspirational.
Man, I love it. And I think we share a the two stories that you brought out are these real life stories. Is that there's a lot of experts out there and thought leaders, and I love talking to them as well. But man, there is nothing better than hearing this firsthand story and somebody that's willing to share that. It just means so much. So I'm definitely going to tune into those. So the any others that sort of come to mind? The
Well, one, I would be absolutely remiss because we've developed such a wonderful personal friendship, and I have the greatest admiration for her is Lori LeBay.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Lori and I, our respective brands, we were on the streaming platform Saltbox TV, and I'd always admired her from afar. And a mutual acquaintance of ours had, introduced us. And Lori and one of her partners was a guest on our show, and we just kind of had kept in communication. And anybody that knows Lori LeBay, will know what a profound impact she has had on the dementia influencer community, education community, resources community. And she's been doing it long before there was a LinkedIn, a Facebook, and
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Did I drop off for a little bit there?
It said recording stopped. So should I start over
Here, I
or
got it. No, no, no. The huh, it's recording here. That's weird. Okay, well, this is just adds to the long list of technical things that I am that we deal with here, but it's recording.
okay.
So but okay, you were talking
Yeah.
last I heard we were talking about Lori LeBay, and I shared the screen, which is where I think something weird happened. But here we can see you have been doing wow, a bunch of discussions. So this is co-hosting with Lori LeBay, I imagine.
Yeah, so we just found that we both have a lot of the same ideals and outlooks on things, and I like to say, and no offense to our East or West Coast friends, but the best come from the Midwest, and Lori's in the Midwest as well, and so there's a lot of commonality and ideals there, and so I had proposed, what would you think, about possibly doing a show together? And, she loved the idea. So we kind of put pen to paper. And um, early last year, we launched a new show that, we produce with Lori that you can find on our YouTube channel and here on our website. But we also have a separate website just for the show. And it's called Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where,
Okay.
our catchphrase is we're tackling tough conversations where we're having a lot of these thought leaders come in and we're talking about like seniors and driving, going over all the resources that are available, things to look out from. But you're not just hearing it from Lori and I, you're hearing it from people that work at the AARP or the Secretary of State and these driving schools and different things. We had the undersheriff on from Wayne County, which Wayne County, Michigan is one of the largest counties in the country. And the undersheriff was on that panel talking about, things look out for, with your loved ones if they're seniors and they're driving, you know. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of good resources and information, but I just admire, people that have come before us, if you will, Steve. And, Lori is one of those key pillars. I say to her all the time, when I think of dementia and the resources, education, and the people that have been doing it the longest, she's on my Mount Rushmore, and I just have great admiration for that.
I love it. And let's see. We got a couple of questions here I want to address, but I'm glad you brought up something that has been a real um soapbox talking point for me, and that's driving. But specifically driving with dementia is that I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I seem to have uh, you know, I'm more aware of it over the last 6 to 8 months where, somebody or somebody's mom has a diagnosis of, mild cognitive impairment even. And it's sort of like, well, how are you doing not driving? And it's sort of like, oh no, I still drive.
Yeah.
And I just sort of feel like we've got to, I get it. It's sort of like you live in a car dependent home, you've been living your life a certain way. But I sort of feel like people on the road with a cognitive impairment are just as risky as to us and them to as texting or drunk driving. And I really hope we can help people with more solutions in that area.
Yeah, well, and on that panel, we also had an emergency room doctor, and the undersheriff and the doctor were kind of having some dialogue as well. And the thing of it is, a lot of times families may not even be aware that their loved one is struggling or having issues with driving. And so, our recommendation professionally when we meet with families is two things. One, the test for us is if you don't feel safe enough being a passenger in your loved one's vehicle, then they probably shouldn't be driving. Secondly, though, is you don't want to carry the brunt of their disdain, if you will, it being the one saying, Mom, Dad, you can't drive. Be the good cop, bad cop, if you will. You know, doctors, if you're not power of attorney or on their paperwork, they can't talk to you, but there's nothing stopping you from talking to them. Explain those concerns and then tell the doctor because doctors aren't always necessarily looking for that in those short office visits. The doctor can be the bad guy. Then you can sympathize with your loved one. Oh, that doctor, but unfortunately they made the decision, Mom, nothing we can do. But it should be about their safety first and then the safety of the others on the road as well.
Yeah, no, and it's yeah, it's heartbreaking, but it's heartbreaking when you hear a story about somebody taking somebody out and then later find out that they had a diagnosis. But it's no, we can get creative and we can use other resources. I mean, the thing is, I've got kids that are early adults, and they're so many of their friends don't drive cars. Like they don't want to drive. It's more cost effective and it's easier to call an Uber. And I think that we can start doing things like that too. Sorry to kind of get on the tangent, but you brought that up. Let's see. Rhonda had a question. What do you think about the drop in nurses and home healthcare nurses? It's becoming a big problem. Yeah, I would be kind of curious about maybe some of the ways that you're tackling the workplace shortage and in incentivizing your caregivers and nurses to take care of elders.
Yeah, well, first, and thank you for the question, Rhonda. One of the big things I tell people, because we get that question quite often, it's unfortunate that it's affecting healthcare, but it's not just healthcare. Some of our banks and stores and restaurants in our community, and we're in a very highly populated area, they're closing on certain days. They're having shorter, business hours, all sorts of things because of this. I don't know if I have the necessary solution. I wish I had, but with us and our company, I don't want to. I'll give a little bit of a long-winded answer here, but you know, one thing for us, because in the home care industry, home health care industry, oftentimes staff who have been other places, they have been manipulated, they've been mistreated, unappreciated, lied to even. And that's one thing that we practice, religiously is we're always going to be upfront and honest with you. We don't play games and we're not going to take you for granted or manipulate you. We have people that have been with us for almost 10 years and 5 years and longer, and that's because we're treating them with the same respect that they deserve to be treated, and we're trying to change that stigma that they have. A lot of them have it so deeply ingrained because they might have been at 4 or 5 other companies before they came to us. And so we say, for us it may be a little too simplistic, we're not going to view you as an employee who may have had a bad ending or termination with us. Don't view us as a bad employer that you may have had a bad experience with. We're new friends. We just meeting each other now. We're giving you the benefit of the doubt. Give us the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. But we take that, very seriously, because once you lose that trust with your staff, or the staff loses your trust, it may never be regained, or it will be with heavy skepticism. We try to pay a lot more competitively to entice people. We have two buildings. One of our buildings is a state-of-the-art training facility for staff. One of the things too about Michigan, we're a non-licensed state for home care. So I literally, Steve, you could be working at our local A&W restaurant and I could hire you to be a caregiver. I'm well within my means and rights to do so, but it doesn't mean I should.
Hmm.
And so families also need to be educated because they're not aware, just like I said to somebody the other day, when I go into my doctor's office, I take for granted he knows what he's doing. He's got a
Hmm.
medical license. I never ask to see it or prove it. It's just an unspoken,
Yeah.
thing. Well, home care is kind of the same way. Families don't realize the person you might be hiring who says they're a company are, working out of their home and it's just them and a couple of their friends, and they don't have any protections. They don't do background checks or screenings or any of that or training. So I think for at least the home care industry, it's providing that due respect to the staff and treating them respectfully because, outside of home care, they're kind of the lowest man on the totem pole when it comes to the healthcare community. But I tell them in the home care community, you are the top man on the totem pole, and we treat them as such.
Man, I love that, and I love the your because I talk to so many people in the profession that may have had a bad experience at a community or with a company, and they're just like, "That's it. I'm not gonna work in, assisted living anymore." And like you, it's sort of like, look, you had a bad experience. Don't throw a blanket over everything, but now you've got more questions to ask, So this is great. Okay, let's see. Maria says, how does a friend of a person who has dementia tell the children that mom shouldn't drive? Okay. And I think Lance and we aren't experts in this area, but that we could talking about a friend of somebody or a neighbor. Number one, I think the most important thing, in my opinion, is you got to let somebody know. I
Right.
mean, because that person with dementia or their spouse is probably not, they're trying to hide it, So you got to let somebody know. And, the goal is not escalating this to Adult Protective Services,
Right.
is that how can we creatively make this happen? Now, the when I'm bringing up, neighbors and friends, the other thing is to offer to be a solution. I mean, a lot of times the reason that people are getting in their car and driving is because they don't think they've got somebody else that can give them a ride somewhere. And if we can be in a volunteer supportive environment, that might help.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts, Lance, on
I
your?
I say, as a friend, be a friend. And by being a friend, if you have these concerns, there's nothing wrong with calling the family and saying, however you want to phrase it, but do it in a loving way, but be very honest and direct. Say, these are the things I'm noticing, or this is what I saw happened, or whatever the scenarios are that's leading you to think there's some issues with that person driving. I would hate to see them hurt themselves or hurt someone else. I think you need to, look into this, because if you don't say anything, in my opinion, anyways, I don't feel like you're really being a friend because a friend wants to help. And by not saying anything, if you have grave concerns or any concerns for that matter, you owe it to that family to let them know. Because if that person leaves their driveway next week and they run into a telephone pole and they injure themselves or worse, and you didn't say anything and you knew it, I think you're going to feel a lot more worse off than you would have if you would have just said, look, I'm saying this in a loving way. I want you to be aware of some concerns that I have or we have about mom or dad or whoever the person is driving.
Great advice. Okay, Edith says, can you recommend home health care in other states like Tucson, Arizona? I'm primarily based in the Mid-Atlantic, Edith, and I know Lance, your business is focused on Michigan, but given that you've got this worldwide audience with all home care, do you have some resources in Tucson that might be helpful for Edith?
So my question, if she could answer this quickly, is she specifically talking about home health care or is she meaning home care? Because my
Okay.
answer will vary depending on which one.
Okay. So yeah, Edith, if you don't mind, following up on that. And while you're doing that, Edith, take your time, because I've got a comment that I'd like to read from Paula, who says, I've inherited the caregiver gene from both of my parents, and it's incredible. The resources we have compared to just 10, 20 years ago. I used to listen to music when I worked. Now I listen to positive aging podcasts. Caregiving ramped up for me just before COVID, when mom stopped driving. Getting daddy to stop was more work. I'm 2 miles from my folks, and I'm referred to on a good day as a care manager. Not such a good day as you're the boss. Paul, at number one, exactly what Lance and I have been talking about. Thanks for sharing that story. And we really honor you, and what you're doing, and just being transparent enough to share it with other people. I can see that caregiving gene could extend beyond, and it has for people like Lance. It might extend beyond and be a career path for you because you're clearly a loving, caring person. Um, okay, and then Edith says, home health care in Tucson. My brother needs help with daily activities like your father.
So then, if he's needing help with activities of daily living or ADLs, I think she would want home care because
Okay.
home health care that is paid for by Medicare up to 9 weeks at a time. It can be extended or shortened depending on the skilled need. Because home health care, they're going to send a registered nurse, OT, PT, social worker, depending on what the needs are of that person, but then they're not going to be there as caregiving, helping them get bathed, dressed, making sure they're eating. And they're only going to be in the home for it's the guidelines are 60 minutes, but it's usually 45 minutes. And then the other 15 minutes is used for charting and documenting their visit. Um, but I'll answer it both ways, Steve, if it's
Okay.
okay.
Oh
So
no. Great.
for home care, Edith, I would first do a Google search for your area, type in home care, look at all the different ones that there are. I'm sure there's quite a few. Look at the reviews. And then I would also go to the Home Care Association of America's website, which, like our company, we're members of. It's the large, kind of association membership for home care providers. They're based in Washington, D.C. See if they're a member there, because there is some, things you have to go through to be approved to be a member. And then when you find one that you think might be a good fit for you, they're going to say, how is this being funded or paid for? Is it private pay, long-term care insurance? Is the care needed as a result of an auto accident? I know in Michigan, the funding with new state legislation has been reduced quite significantly. So like our company right now is not working with auto insurance because of the reimbursement rate having been dropped so much.
Hmm.
And then, interview them, find out, are your employees direct hires or do you use subcontractors? If you're concerned about their qualifications, what are your qualifications to being a caregiver with your company? Ours, you have to have a minimum of a years of professional healthcare experience. Do you do full background checks, motor vehicle checks, criminal checks, things of that nature, and make sure they have bonding and also workman's comp and insurance covering. So the last thing you want to have happen is that person's working in your home, they hurt themselves, and then they're going to try to blame the family and get compensated versus a company having workman's compensation that would cover and protect that employee and insulate the family from any responsibility. Um, then ask if you can interview the caregivers if you find the company that you like, and then find the ones that you think you match up well with. I hope that answers that question.
Oh, it's a great answer. And while you were talking, Edith, I went to Home Care Association of America, did a quick search on Tucson, and these are member organizations of Home Care Association of America. That's a good one. The other resource, not just for Edith in uh, Tucson, or looking for your brother in Tucson, is look up the Area Agency on Aging in the region that you're looking for. This is the one that's there in uh, it's called the Pima Council on Aging, which is in Tucson. And you'll find that these can be a great resource for grant funding and for different resources and directories and things of that nature. So I think those are a couple of really good resources there for Edith.
And then for home health care, I would go to Medicare.gov, look at the home health care companies in your area, because those, every state, no matter where you are, that is regulated very stringently. And look at, see if they had complaints or any issues with their license slash company. But again, that's more through a doctor's order, and they're only going to come in if there's a specific diagnosed healthcare need. So let's say the person had a hip replacement, they went in the nursing home for rehab for a few weeks or whatever the timeline may be, and they're not able to go out to outpatient physical therapy. A doctor can write an order for home health care services, but they're only going to come in, usually it's about 3 times a week, up to 9 weeks. If the need continues, like I'll use my father as an example, that was an ongoing thing. And his was maybe a little different than most situations. They were coming 4 to 5 times a week, but it was only to investigate and treat and watch over the wound. It didn't matter anything else, so they're not going to go outside of that scope of what that skilled need requires. Um, but they can also work hand in hand. We have a lot of homes where we're in the homes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and families will call and say, well, the doctor said we need, home health care, physical therapy. Does this interfere with your services? We say, no, absolutely not. We work hand in hand, because they're not doing what we're doing, but at the same time, we're not doing what they are. But they often like it when we're in the home. For an example, if that person with that hip replacement was getting physical therapy 3 times a week, is that person engaging and doing their exercises the other 4 days of the week? Sometimes not. Sometimes it requires a second person, or they just don't do it. They love it when there is professional staff in the home, because we're going to follow their guidelines and their instructions and continue doing those exercises on the day PT is not there.
Oh, I love it. And so your specific agency just you just do home care,
That's home care.
not the Medicare home health care. And for folks that are out there, like a lot of times, as Lance had said, the home health care is a lot of times you might be in the hospital, or you might be getting discharged from a skilled nursing center, and you've got this prescription, and that's a great difference. And Edith, you could see there, I while Lance was talking, I was able to do just a quick search on Medicare.gov, and find those home health care. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes companies are providing both.
Yeah, yeah, occasionally. I will say, at least in our area, Steve, there's not a tremendous amount. I can only even think of one actually, and it's not really even a company, it's more of a staffing service.
Mhm.
Um, but our kind of our philosophy is, we want to do one and just master that one, and rather than, siding off. But like with our company, we do use nurses, but not for hands-on care.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need it for insurance purposes. Our nurse will go either do, education, training, or sometimes there's certain documentation that an RN must be the one doing the evaluation, which is no problem. But we just find, oftentimes a lot of your hospitals, they usually have several in-house ones, especially now, our hospitals are buying up the smaller community hospitals, and they're kind of squeezing out the opportunity for a lot of other non-hospital, non-healthcare system companies to thrive in home healthcare.
Yeah, and then let's see, Zahada is asking, do you do hospice, and how is that care different?
So we do not do hospice. I say we do end of life care, but not in the sense of hospice care. So let's say we're with Mary Sue and, she's dealing with a terminal illness and the family decides to admit her into hospice. Again, just like with home health care, hospice is not going to be at the home. Sometimes they don't even come at all during the week. A lot of times it's based on the needs of the family. If the family has a concern, they'll come, they'll evaluate the person, they might change their medications or what have you. But so hospice and home health care, they don't stay in the home for hours at a time. Home health care is for up to 9 weeks at a time. It can be shorter based on the need. It could be longer based on the need. Hospice, there is no cost to the family. But again, they're not going to be in the home. You do get a lot of good resources at no cost to you through hospice. But if you need that person, that I say physical body there providing care, hospice isn't going to do that unless you admit them into a hospice facility, which there's not a lot of those. But again, we work hand in hand with hospice also. A lot of times they're nurses when they call, and if the person we're caring for, if they're not able to communicate, we will, we'll give the hospice nurse a report and she'll say, oh, great, thank you. I might come by next week on Tuesday to check in or, something along those lines.
I love it. Great descriptions, Lance. And for Zahada, I just dropped into chat all of the discussions that we've done on the topic that intersect with the topic of end of life. And if hospice or anything is something that you're is of interest to you, take a look at some of those previous discussions and maybe listen to them. Lance, it's funny. I was just scrolling here and I was asking you about your favorite podcast discussions. This is my favorite one right here. This woman, Ginger, was basically in a nursing home, diagnosed with dementia, hallucinations, all kinds of stuff, was placed on hospice. And when in general, the practice of putting somebody on hospice is you take them off all their meds except for pain meds. And she bounced back and now she lives on her own independently in a condo in Southern California. And just like some of your guests,
Yeah,
was like, I want to share my story.
it's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
Oh, Deborah heard it. That was great. Okay, let's see. Greg asks, hey, Lance and Steve, does your area have services that specialize or address the indoor environmental contamination in homes of in-home outpatients? How are these identified and handled? These environments are hazardous to both the caregiver and the patient. And actually, you said something early on in the discussion that sort of intersects with what Greg is talking about, in that you said, we could bring my dad into the home because it was a safe and uh, uh, habitable
Yeah.
environment. I mean, as a home care provider, I imagine you're talking to families sometimes that say, oh, mom needs care in the home. And then you visit the home, and as Greg had alluded to, you would never go into a hospital bed or an assisted living in a room or an environment like that.
Yeah. Fortunately, we have only encountered a situation like that one time as of now. And one of the things, going back to, staffing and things, staff will say, oh, they sent me to this home and, this, that, or the other. And we tell them, before our staff ever have arrived or been introduced into a home, we've been there at least once or twice ourselves. Now, the staff, likewise, we never let them go to a home the first time, even after we've been there by themselves. Whether the staff had been with us for 10 years or 10 minutes, we always go with them the first time. But before they go, we sit down and we go through an exhaustive care plan and needs assessment of that individual. Because, like I told somebody not too long ago, I said, even though you've been with us for 8 years, this is your first day at this home. So that's interesting to think about because every home is different and you don't know what you're going into. But if we've always said if it's not safe enough for us to enter and to go into that home, we would never require or expect our staff to. we will let the family know if this is not safe or if it's not, sanitary, if you will. You need to do something to address it for the well-being of your loved one. So we have encountered that, but only one time, and it was very, very serious. And we notified the family, trusting that they would handle it appropriately, which they did.
Thanks for bringing that up, Greg. And I noticed Greg's name. He's uh, in this business of, just creating a clean environment. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. And, it's funny, Lance, when we were talking before this, I go, Lance, hey, we might not go a whole hour. Just don't, worry, we'll wrap it up or whatever. I'm looking at the clock. We have burned through an hour. I could talk to you for another hour more. This really this really expanded way beyond what I expected, where we got a glimpse of your podcast, but I'm really glad. I really like how you pulled back the curtains on operating a home care provider, as a home care provider as well.
I appreciate the opportunity, Stephen. Everyone's questions and information. If you're okay with it, anybody has questions, I'm an email away. Feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do to help or anything we can, provide further information on. We're happy to do so. We're all in this together to help each other and to help our, care communities.
And Rick is asking about criterion to create a safe environment. I tell you what, Rick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put I've got Greg's email. I'll drop that into the chat on the recording link. And I think your best bet to get that answered would be to email Greg directly. He's a wealth of information. But all right, folks. Well, thanks so much. Thank you, Lance. I've got a few podcasts that I'm going to be listening to on your platform here.
I'm going
And
to listen to Gingers too.
yeah. And I'm just delighted that our paths have crossed, and
Likewise.
really looking forward to hearing all the great things with your organization as well.
Thank
So
you.
all right, folks, have a good one, and we'll see you next week on our